Sometimes you've got to do what you gotta do. StatQuest. Hello, and welcome to StatQuest. StatQuest is brought to you by the friendly folks in the genetics department at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Today we're going to talk about how to make a mean pizza crust. Here I am in my kitchen, and the first thing I need to do is measure out 500 grams of bread flour. Bam! I nailed it. Then I measure 1/8 of a teaspoon of instant yeast, and then I measure out 500 grams of water. Close enough. Then I just mix it all together. That's all there is to do for the first step. Now we cover it and let it rest for 8 to 12 hours. After waiting 8 to 12 hours, I add another 500 grams of bread flour. Now I add 20 grams of salt. Lastly, I add 200 grams of water. Now I mix the dough together. I start by stirring it around, but then I switch to a pinching motion where I use my thumb and index finger to pinch through the wet dough to get the dry flour all the way into the middle. And I just pinch and stir and sort of grab and kind of move the dough around to try to get all of the flour and the salt and the new water incorporated into the existing wet dough. Once I've combined all the new flour, water, and salt, I've got a lot of sticky dough on my hand. The way to get it off is to just run a little water on your hand. You don't have to wash it off, just get a little water on your hand. And then go back to kneading, just kind of reaching under, folding the dough over. And a lot of the dough that was stuck to your hand will start coming off. And what I do is I do this a couple of times. I'll get more water in my hand, and I'll just knead a little bit more, and over time, my hand will gradually get pretty clean. Now that I've got the dough off my hand, I cover it up and let it rest for 15 minutes. Here's the dough after letting it rest for 15 minutes. Now I get a lot of water in my hands, and I reach under the dough, scoop under, pull up, and fold over. Then rotate 90 degrees, and I do this 4 times, so I've folded the dough over on itself 4 times. Put it in a nice little ball, and then let it rest for another 15 minutes. You need to do this every 15 to 30 minutes for the next 1 to 2 hours. The goal is to let the dough get kind of stretchy and also to let the yeast start activating. You'll know when you're done when you can start feeling little bubbles of air in the dough. After 1 or 2 hours of folding every 15 to 30 minutes, it's time to prepare the dough into little balls that can be made into pizza later on. I start by pouring a little bit of oil on the dough, and then I pour a little bit of oil in some Tupperware containers. There's enough dough for 6 pizza crusts, but what I like to do is make 3 pizzas and a loaf of bread. Now that I've prepared the containers, I rub the oil on the dough and then divide the dough by half by pinching it right down the middle. Since I'm going to use half of this dough for a loaf of bread, I fold it into a ball. And then I put it in this wicker basket that I've put rice flour and bran flakes in. This just makes it look fancy. It's no big deal. Now I go back to the remaining dough and split it into 3 pieces. Then I shape each piece into a ball. I then use that ball to rub the oil in the Tupperware around so everything's nice and coated with oil. And then I just repeat for the next 2 pieces of dough. Once I've finished shaping each piece of dough, I put the lids on the Tupperware containers, and I put the loaf of bread in a plastic bag. It's one of those produce bags you get in the grocery store. Then I put it in the refrigerator, and I let it rest for at least 8 hours. But you can actually let it rest for 24 or even a couple of days. It's no big deal. It also freezes well. Once I'm ready to make pizza, I put a pizza stone as close to the broiler element as I can, and I preheat it for 10 minutes on high. Now we're ready to make pizza. I have a pizza peel, and I spread a little cornmeal on top of it. I want it to be nice and even. Now I get a piece of dough out of one of the tuppers, and I press it in to some flour, just to get flour on one side, the bottom side. Now I stretch the dough out into a nice round circle that I can use for a pizza. Once I have a nice shape for my pizza, I spread a little bit of sauce on top. Then I add a little bit of cheese, and then I add whatever toppings I have around the house. Once the pizza is ready to go, I slide it on top of the pizza stone and turn the broiler down. Then I let it cook for 5 minutes and then turn the broiler back up, and I watch it like a hawk for the next minute, sometimes just 30 seconds. It'll burn quick, so keep your eye on it. Once the pizza's done, I just scoop it out with a big pan, and that's all there is to it. Voila! If you want to bake bread, preheat the oven to 475 degrees Fahrenheit with a cast iron pot in there. When it's preheated, take the lid off, and then flip the bread in, and then cut slits in the top of the loaf. Now put the lid back on the pot and bake it for about 25 minutes. After 25 minutes, take the lid off the top of the pot and bake for another 10 minutes. When the bread's done baking, pull it out of the oven and use a spatula to pop it out onto a cooling rack. This bread tastes great fresh, but you know what? It tastes even better if you freeze it and then reheat it. I have no idea why, but it just tastes better that way. Hooray! We've made it to the end of another exciting StatQuest. If you like this StatQuest and want to see more like it, feel free to subscribe. Tune in next time for another exciting StatQuest.